Hello, my name is Amy Natsky. I welcome you to my channel. Today I'm doing the last video of excerpts from SABINA WURMBRAND's book, The Pastor's Wife. Now I've only read a little bit of this book. You can hear that it's a marvelous story. I hope you'll be inspired to read the rest. Today feels like the beginning of allergy season in Oregon, where I live, so I might be a bit sniffly, but I don't want to let that stop me. So here we go. One morning, I was in my attic when Marietta rushed in, out of breath. "Alice is home!" After 4 years. We snatched up our coats and ran outside and jumped on a tram. There she was, thin and worn and smiling. How many things she had to say. But she had nothing, just the patched rags on her back. "Tomorrow we'll bring you some things," I promised. "But I know you haven't anything yourself," she said. "Oh, but we live in the lap of luxury," laughed Mihai. "You should see our penthouse flat." "Carpets on the walls," said Marietta. "On the windows, too. Running water, straight through the ceiling." How lucky we were, I thought, compared with so many other women. We were surrounded with love. Everywhere it was working for us, running secretly like sap in the great tree of the underground church. All night I couldn't close my eyes. In the morning we gathered a few things and took them to Alice, to the cousin's flat where she had slept. Now, indeed, we had reason to hope that our dear ones would come home. But weeks passed, and months. Every few weeks a friend named Marcia came running to the attic. "The amnesty! It's coming next week. This time it's really true." Soon she was nicknamed Sister Amnesty. Marcia worked hard for the church, and she had a husband in an official post, so her rumors were taken more seriously. The real amnesty, when it came, took us all unawares. I'd risen early and gone out shopping for the family. It was a Wednesday in June, warm and blue. When I came home, I found the daily paper waiting for me. A friend had brought it on his way to work. In a modest space on page 1 was the news, amnesty. It was not for every political prisoner. In fact, it was not clear who it was for at all. I read and reread it. The announcement was hedged about with protective phrases. They couldn't admit that thousands of people, having been unjustly locked up for years, would now be freed. It made them look too silly, and Moscow was watching. I hurried round to a friend's room. A little group had already gathered to discuss the news. "Oh, it'll be like last year, criminals only," said Miss Landauer. But Sister Amnesty was there too. "No," she said. "Haven't I told you so often? Let us pray and thank God, and you'll see." So we prayed and returned home. I hadn't been back 5 minutes when a neighbor came running. A telephone call had come from an old friend who'd been released that morning from Gerla. "He says your husband was on the list for today. He saw him waiting in the yard. He's coming." When she'd gone, I tried to peel the potatoes, but my heart was beating so fast I had to sit down. Hours passed. Another knock on the door. Mr. Ionescu, an old friend who lived on the floor below and had a telephone, stood there smiling. He took my hand and said, "It's someone calling you from out of town." So I went down and picked up the receiver, and on the other end was Richard. When I heard his voice, I couldn't speak. I felt myself falling. A noise roared in my ears like the sea, and then darkness poured over me. I opened my eyes again on worried faces staring down. "She's all right." "You fainted." They'd brought Mihai down now. He was laughing and talking on the telephone. Richard was in the home of friends in Cluj. "I didn't know if I still had a wife and children," he said. "I thought I'd better find out." He was well and free. He was coming home as soon as he could. Gerla was hundreds of miles away in the western provinces. He'd catch a train from Cluj, the nearest railway point, but not today. His first underground meeting had already been arranged there that evening. During the afternoon, other friends came home from prisons all over the country. A score of us, wives and friends, waited and talked in the attic, anxious, hopeful. There was a commotion on the staircase. A telegram. I tore it open. "Richard says he's coming on the overnight train. He'll be here at 8:30 tomorrow morning." With a moan, Sister Amnesty slipped to the floor. This time she had fainted. They crowded round, slapping her cheeks, sprinkling cold water. Of course, we had no sleep that night. Every hour news came of fresh releases. Men and women we hadn't seen for 10, 15 years walked in through the door, as if back from the dead. The whole house was full of people greeting each other, remembering, making plans in a fever of talk. Flowers kept arriving, big bunches of summer roses that had cost the earth, from friends who could not come themselves because of the danger. They couldn't be seen at the station, these people, so we took their flowers instead to show their love. I hadn't realized there were so many. Sister Amnesty had her arms full of gladioli. Marietta carried roses. Mrs. Armianu and Alice had big white Michaelmas daisies. The sun shone down with the lovely freshness of early morning light. Crowds of anxious, expectant people were meeting every train, hoping against hope that their prisoners would come. They had no news. Then the train arrived. The big, droning diesel engine slipped past, and my eyes searched the carriages. A loudspeaker announcement blared. The crowd churned round, pushing and jostling. I saw Richard before he saw me. He was leaning from a carriage window, thin and pale, with a shaven head. God had given him back to me. His clothes were very shabby. His boots had no laces. They weren't allowed, and they were too big. He came towards me, walking so slowly, tall and smiling, swimming about in his boots, and embraced Mihai and me. The station rocked with the noise of shouts and greetings. Someone with a camera lined the three of us up for a photograph. People crowded round asking Richard for news of their friends and relatives, the ones who had not come back on the train. Then I remembered how many had not come back, and never would, for they died in prison. "Don't speak," Richard said. "Let me just look at you." Day and night the attic was packed with friends and strangers who came from all over the country to see Richard again. Standing, sitting, squeezing in the ever-open door, everyone had to have a word with him. The secret police didn't try to break it up, because they could only have done so with a machine gun. They watched and made their little notes in the background. Richard was thin as a stick and weighed about 7 stone. He'd survived beating and brainwashing. He had to go into hospital at once. But even there, people continued to flock in to see him until the director said apologetically he'd have to move. The secret police were complaining. He went from hospital to hospital and finally landed in the sanatorium of Sinaia, one of the most beautiful mountain towns, where the Royal Summer Palace was once. But still people came by motorcycle and bicycle and bus. The secret police sent another warning. He decided to leave. There was nothing else he could do. In Bucharest, things were chaotic. Tens of thousands of political prisoners were freed that year. They sought jobs and wives and children, and they tried, sometimes with terrible results, to fit into a life they hadn't known for 15 or 20 years. There were tragedies in hearts and homes and on the streets. The police couldn't cope with all the confusion, and so Richard seized the chance to preach secretly in any church where the pastor would have him, and we were able to help many friends. We sent Mrs. Armianu down to Constanza for a Black Sea holiday. Her husband had not been released. Richard even managed to obtain a license to preach, but it was limited to a church in the village of Orsova, which had an officially restricted congregation of 36 members. "If there's one more," the secret police warned, "there'll be trouble. We know you, and we're watching you." Richard told me, "I don't think I can speak there. Other people are bound to turn up when the word gets round that I'm preaching. We'll only harm the people at Orsova." Since 1948, Romania had been selling Jews to Israel. Our hopes of leaving were pinned on this traffic. Thousands upon thousands of Jews were still trying to get out. Long lines of them waited at militia headquarters for application forms. The exodus had already offended Arab nations, and the government was cautious, but official scruples could be overcome on payment of a large sum to the authorities. Negotiations were long and tedious for us. and all they produced was a tip from a high official that our dossiers were stamped "Never to leave." But we didn't give up. Friends suggested Mihai should go ahead of us. At that time he seemed to be in the greatest danger. Others said I should try to leave alone and raise money in the West to bail us out. At last, after more than a year's work and pressure from friends in the West, we were told, "Your exit visas will be granted. The dollars have been received." Richard was called for a last encounter with the secret police. They told him, "Now you can leave. Preach all you like abroad, but speak against us and you'll be silenced." We have had evidence since that threat has not been forgotten. So we decided for the time being not to go. In any case, the underground church work in Bucharest was keeping us too busy to permit it. In secret gatherings here and there, because meetings in houses were illegal, Richard brought hundreds of souls to Christ. But still he didn't seem to think that he was doing enough, and we didn't know how long he would be able to keep out of police hands. When I asked him what his plans were for the future, he said, "Ideally, I'd like to be a recluse, to retire into a desert place like the hermits of old and spend the rest of my life in contemplation of God and in meditation. But things are very far from ideal." Once more he saw how little freedom the church had, how it was infested with informers, from the highest bishops to the humblest members of the congregation. Priests told him that if they failed to report on their flocks, their churches would be closed. Children and young people were indoctrinated with atheism more fiercely than ever. But what disturbed Richard most deeply was to learn how ignorant and how naively credulous people were in the West over communism and its attempts to destroy religion. At this time I began to have contact with certain high dignitaries of the Russian Church, by means which I cannot disclose. Many were party tools, and they told us so openly and with sorrow. They had no choice, they said. Other prelates from behind the Iron Curtain who went to international conferences, men chosen by the party and playing the role ascribed to them by the communists, were in fact working for the underground church. When they got back, we were given their impressions. They were horrified to find what dupes some of the British and American delegates to these conferences are. They believe absolutely anything they're told, they said. Some are more enthusiastic about communism than any real communist. What could be done about it? Leaders of the underground church met and decided that Richard should make the attempt to reach the West. His task would be to make people understand the reality of what was happening to us and what might happen to them. I, too, had a last meeting with officialdom. It was the bailiff knocking on the door, a list of property to be confiscated in his hand. "This is absolutely your last chance to pay." "Come tomorrow," I said, "and you can take everything." Brethren and sisters came from far-off villages and towns to say farewell. Friends in Bucharest arrived every hour to wish us well. Early next morning we were at the airport. It was December 6th, the feast of St. Nicholas, patron of prisoners in the Romanian Orthodox calendar. A damp mist seemed to dissolve the buildings and the gray aircraft out on the runway. Ours was an old DC-7, and there were 60 of us, all ransomed, and nearly all Jews. We'd been there since dawn, and a warm sense of oneness, of deep gratitude at our good fortune in escaping from communism, and of deeper grief for those whom we left behind in its grip, held us together. The officials, the passport men, the girls in uniform with lists in their hands, looked at us with envious eyes. We were going to live in the West. In the West. They had tried to stop a crowd gathering at the airport, but a crowd had come to see us off just the same. Looking back, waving towards them through the sheets of plate glass, we trooped out over the wet, gray asphalt. The mist was lifting. We boarded the plane. Mihai found himself next to the only foreign passenger, an Italian businessman who at once began to talk. Cheerfully, he asked Mihai a score of questions. He hadn't thought it was as bad as they said. All those stories one heard about life under communism. He'd had some very good meals at the Athénée Palace, Bucharest's most luxurious hotel. Mihai was silent. They went down the steps together at Rome airport. Mihai asked, "This is really Rome? Not East Berlin or somewhere?" Sure, laughed the businessman. "See that sign over there? Bevete Coca-Cola. You're on Italian soil." "So, then I am a free man." And he began to weep. Finally he said, "Now, if you like, I'll tell you how it really is in Romania, but I don't know if I could ever make you or anyone else understand." And with that, we advanced towards the customs. My brother and sister-in-law waited for us at the airport. Love had urged them come specially from Paris. From Rome, we flew to Oslo. In Norway, the lovely country which offered us a home, we were met by members of the Israel Mission, which had paid part of the ransom, and by other church officials. But first and foremost by Anutza. She had worked 15 years for this reunion. Nor had we been forgotten by Pastor Hedenquist, head of the Swedish Israel Mission. He came specially from Stockholm. Over the years he had prayed for us every day. The Hebrew Christian Alliance, which had made another part of the ransom, inquired immediately about our needs. Then we went to Britain. Here our friend Stuart Harris opened to us the doors of universities and a multitude of churches of all denominations. People heard at last about the martyrs and victories of the underground church, which had been almost unknown until then. British Christians were not aware of the facts. The persecution of their brethren in the third of the world under communist domination had been barely mentioned to them. Friends made in Oslo, Pastors Sturdy and Knudsen, saw to it that we should go to America. Richard and I spoke again at churches, at big rallies, seminaries, ladies' guilds. Richard was called to testify before committees of the U.S. Senate and later of Congress. I sat near him when he spoke. Not only senators, but representatives of newspapers and radio stations around the world were there. Batteries of TV cameras were turned on him as he spoke about the suffering of the underground church. 1/3 of the world is entitled to 1/3 of your prayers, of your concerns, of your gifts. In prison I saw men with 50-pound chains at their feet, praying for America. But in America you seldom hear in a church a prayer for those in chains in communist prisons. Asked by a senator if he bore any marks of torture, he stripped himself to the waist and showed 18 scars on his body. People wept at his words. "I don't boast of these scars. I show the tortured body of my church and my country. I speak for the heroes and saints who cannot speak for themselves. Protestants, Catholics, Orthodox, and Jews who died under torture for their religion." Tears flowed down my face as I sat near him. I had before my eyes the farm women, the nuns, the many young girls, the Protestants and the Catholics, the Zionist ladies who slaved over new pharaonic works because they had wished to see God's promise to the Jewish people fulfilled. I remembered those who had died. I knew that by death they had passed into the loving hands of the one who made lilies and carnations. But still I could not stop weeping. Richard said later, "Your tears made a greater impression than all my words. Tears undermined the strongest walls." Richard dictated his first book, Today's Martyred Church Tortured for Christ. I listened, sitting on a sofa, trying to knit. He wept. I wept too. It was a very simple book, but written not with ink, rather with tears and blood of martyrs. Unexpectedly, it became a bestseller in a score of languages. This book and our visits to different countries and continents became the starting point for the creation of 19 missions in the free nations of Europe and Asia, in Australia and America. They worked together to bring to the underground church Christian literature, radio broadcasts in their language, and relief for families of martyrs. One book after another came from Richard's pen. He was tireless in preaching, but didn't simply talk. He created efficient organizations to work secretly in the Red Camp. Some questioned his methods, but their criticisms always came too late. Richard acted, considering that there would be time enough for justifications later. We were happy among all peoples in every country we saw. We felt at home with our German brethren. Between the German and the Jewish people there are rivers of blood, but perhaps it was not by accident that the sea which God parted for the Jews was called the Red Sea. Those who love can come through even a sea of blood. Only those who persist in hatred are drowned in it. We were happy with our Australasian, with our Maori brethren, with white, black, and Indians in Africa. We had meetings without apartheid in South Africa. Intermingled, Christians of all races and colors of skin listened in tears to the message of Christ as taught in the underground church. Our personal life has also changed a great deal. Richard had been for years a prisoner treated with contempt, accustomed to mockery and beatings. Now he is given adulation which might turn another man's head. But Richard has passed through the fiery furnace. He knows that the applause is not his due, that glory belongs only to God. The publicity helps those who have few other spokesmen. Fame, as well as shame, can be borne humbly. We have had great joys. We have also had our anxieties. Whenever I am away from Richard, I fear. But if it is dangerous to do God's work, how much more dangerous it is to leave it undone. No man can stop a hurricane. Neither can I stop Richard from exposing more and more the cruelties and subtle infiltrations of communism, so rousing the fury of communist leaders and their tools in the church. May the angels of God protect him. Those whom Richard attacks certainly don't remain passive. They put barriers in his path. If they had studied his character first, they might realize it was hopeless. The higher the barrier, the greater his leap. He started his Christian life facing grave external obstacles and turned them into assets. And now I am back at work, the work of a smuggler. Not a nice word, except that the smuggled goods are Bibles. The work of helping the families of Christian martyrs and underground pastors. The work of fighting the anti-Christian poison in Western youth. This work grows every day. The names of martyrs are known now throughout the whole world, and children go to bed remembering them in their prayers. Will not these prayers be heard? As the pastor's wife, I have often told youngsters a story of the boy who stood on the shore and waved to a ship at sea. A man beside him said, "Don't be silly. The steamer will not change its course because you wave." But the ship turned, came to shore, and picked up the boy. From the bridge he shouted, "Sir, I am not a fool. The captain is my father." We also know that he who steers the universe on its course is our Father, and that he hears our prayers.